Thou hast made me endless, such is thy pleasure. This frail vessel thou emptiest again and again, and fillest it ever with fresh life. This poem was written by Nobel laureate Tagore sometime in 1908 and 9, over 100 years ago. Each of our lives are gifts to this world. We know that, but we seldom feel that. And then, time to time, we come across some extraordinary lives who makes us feel that how true these words are. Our guest, Dr. Tair Hollander, and her husband David lived an extraordinary life. Their story and life experience will make you jump with joy, make you cry, and also make you feel good. But altogether, it will inspire you. It will drive you to beat all odds. It is once in a generation story, and I am proud to have them on my podcast. This is part 1. I have a small disclosure. I do see sometimes podcasters ask questions that tries to dig deep into the feelings of some painful events of their guests. In my podcast, when my guests present some experience that are heart-wrenching, I decide not to ask questions to dig deep into those pains. The purpose of my podcast is to be inspired by my guests' journeys and show that as a human being, we are more than pain and pleasure that we experience. We are all capable of doing wonderful things in our lives. Welcome to Sapien. This is Sam. We have been talking for some time already. So it has been, I am very much inspired by your journey. So if you could actually start with, how you, start with your probably your journey to US. So that could be, if you actually feel like sharing that.
My first journey to the U.S. My husband, he likes to tell the stories of that my aunts told when I was a little one before I came to the U.S. That probably tells the what happens to me after I got to the U.S. with my life in the garden.
Of course.
He loves his story, and so when he tells it, it's he really because he possesses it so that I'm always interested when he tells the story.
Well, you have to understand the scenario. Here
Sure.
she, at the age of 3 or 4 months, you're brought over to Italy from the States where you were born. You're brought over to Italy to grow up in a little town in northern Italy with two couples who will serve as your parents. There were two sisters who were survivors of Dachau, two Jewish sisters who married two Italian brothers. And the sisters are not able to give birth. But when this one became available, they asked that she be brought over and that they would bring her up.
Okay.
Two houses side by side with a garden, a flower garden in the middle.
They were
between the two houses.
between the two houses.
So, my wife was, in her first 4 or 5 years, she was brought up by the entire village. One day she'd want to be a butcher, the next day she'd want to, she'd hang with all the different bits at all the different stores. And
I was the only little one that was left in this walled village. Because all of the people were, the children had all moved out and gone off to school or to colleges and things. So I was the only baby in the entire village and the only little one.
from the entire village. And they must have loved her to death. And one day it's time for her to go to school. So she goes to school for the first time with all the other children and comes back home. And she says to her aunts, "I'm never going to go to that school again." They say, "Why?" She says, "Because nobody there is my color."
Okay.
And not has my hair either.
So they say, come to the garden. We want to show you something. She had learned everything from the garden, how to count, the colors, all the stuff. The aunts say, pick out the most beautiful rose you can find. And she picks out this rose which has a deep intensity, deep red, intense red rose.
This is
Oh, right.
his passion.
And the aunt says, she says, sometimes God loves a flower so much he puts a little extra color into it.
Yep.
And
That's a fantastic way to say it.
And so that how it was, because everything they taught me in the garden, everything, counting, about the weeds and how some things were weeds and some things were, but the weeds can help out. And they showed me everything I need to learn in the garden. Then when I went to school, but prior to that, my uncles had a trattoria. And we got the first television in the village. It was at the trattoria. So everybody, and there was a program that came on called the Our Gang Kids.
What is that called again?
Our Gang Kids.
Comedy.
It was
Okay.
Our Gang Kids, and it had all these little kids, little kids, and one was a guy named by the name of Alfalfa, and he had these like braids all over his head, tied up in ribbons like an old slave and thing. Well, my aunts had no idea, because my hair was so wild, how to comb my hair. They were like, "Oh, that's how you comb their hair." So that fixed my hair up before I went to school with all these ribbons and everything. And I was going off to school, and I was laughed at and treated so bad. And they were like, "Look at your hair." They were pulling my hair. "Look at your skin." So I just said, "No more. I'm not going to that school." And so when my aunts told me that, just think, how much time you spend when you color, how long it takes to color something red, or like the rose, or when you color a flower, how long it takes. Look how much time you had to give that. Just think how much time God took to color you.
Oh, wow. That's so nice.
And so they were like, God loves you so much. And so all of a sudden I'm like, oh my goodness. This is something. And I felt so superior. That night, I think it was that week, and that night there was this big thunderstorm. And so it was time to go to bed, and I didn't want to go to bed in the storm. And my uncles were very lenient on me, and my aunts were one aunt, Diana, she was like, "You can go to sleep. You go to bed. You go to bed." And I would cry, so she would say, "You cannot have no pie, no dessert. You go to bed because you're being a crier." So the storm happened, and I remembered that afternoon in the garden, how I was told that God loves me so much. And the storm was cracking, and I'm like, oh no, God, she didn't mean to be mean to me. She would have, I was misbehaving. So please don't let the world in. Don't hurt them. Save them. Don't. I promise you, tomorrow night she will not send me to bed like that. I promise you. So I wake up the next morning and I go downstairs and everybody's there eating breakfast and everything.
The sun is shining.
And the sun is shining and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's true. God loves me more than anything because he spared the lives of my aunts when they were, and he didn't kill them because I asked them not to.
Right.
So, oh, I am so powerful. And I would say, oh, God loves my aunts and uncles and everybody but me more. So on the Sundays, and then my uncles built a shul for my aunts when they came, and there were other, they were able to connect with other refugees from Dachau, the prison camps around. So they built a shul inside of our village because of my aunts. My aunt, how I got the whole thing with my aunts. My grandfather on my father's side.
Their father.
Huh?
Their father.
Well, no, not their. I'm not talking about their father. I'm talking about my father.
Right.
I'm talking about my father's father.
Right.
My father's father was half black and half white,
Okay.
and they lived in the South. So his parents, his mother was an overseer, not an overseer. She was a maid in the house, and his father was an Irish overseer, and they really fell in love. And from the South, that area, Missouri, Illinois, that whole thing where they was
Okay.
that entire area. So they decided that they were going to send their son to New York to his Irish family.
Okay.
Gets to New York with the Irish family, he's absolutely treated terribly. They slam the door on him.
Right.
So he's in New York, not knowing anywhere. His Irish family, it looks more white and Irish than he does black. But he finds out that there's a regiment of black soldiers in Harlem that are getting ready to go and fight in the First World War, World War One. And he joins the black regiment in World War One. And when he joins it, and so then he's highly educated, really well, and everything. He ends up in charge of a unit that, after the war was over, they had to occupy Germany
To keep the peace.
to keep the peace, while all the white soldiers got to come home to America. The black soldiers had to keep the peace. And then the Germans hated it. So my grandfather this is what I hear, was going to go commit AWOL. And he was so miserable, but he met this rabbi. And the rabbi, he felt very much, he learned so much knowledge, and he felt great love for the rabbi. And the rabbi would have him come to dinner on the weekend, and so he went. He fell in love with the rabbi's eldest daughter, which ended the relationship between he and the rabbi. But the daughter was very much in love with him. So in order for the Americans to marry or have anything to do with the nationals, you're not even supposed to have anything to do with the people that you're guarding or protecting. The girl would have to be pregnant. So this girl says she's pregnant, and so she now marries my grandfather, and of course she doesn't get to see her father, her mother, and she has two little sisters. And so after she leaves and goes to America a few years later, here comes the World War II. And her parents that are in Germany, who are Jews, her father was a rabbi, all of them were put into concentration camps. Her mother, her father were killed. Her two little sisters were put into Dachau. Eventually, she was able to, after the war, get them. They were able to come over to the States, but they had to stay at Ellis Island. And my grandfather's wife, which was my grandmother, Betty Finkelstein, were told that in order to get my aunts out of Ellis Island, my grandfather would have to prove he could take care of everybody financially. So he had to work. He was going to school, but he was also working on the docks. And because he looked half white, half black, sort of Italian, the Italians had the dock, the ship workers, they would get jobs. And he met two brothers that had just come over from Italy a few years before, and they were working on the docks with my grandfather. And so he says, would you like to go to Ellis Island on Sundays to meet my sister-in-laws? So they went to Ellis Island on a Sunday, and they all started. And so the two brothers, like the two sisters, and eventually they said that they'd like to marry the two sisters. Each brother would like to marry each sister. And they married them, and they all lived in New York for a bit. And then my uncle's father died, and he had to go back. They had to go back home to Italy to take care of the property and their mother and everything. So they had to go back, and they took their two wives. And those two wives, and then my grandfather and grandmother ended up going to live in Missouri and Kansas, and they had two sons that eventually they had two boys, and they went to West Point. And so the neighborhood they lived in, my grandfather had been going to school. He had gotten a law degree. My grandmother, as being a Jewish Balabusta, and everybody think that she had a bakery shop. She had a cleaners. And it's so funny. Years later, when I meet David, the people that go to the symphony to hear his mom and even your mother and people who and mother and father playing became the people who came to our salons, talked about how they used to buy challah bread for my grandmother, my father's mother. And that was just, that was long. She was gone for a long time then. But it was just so interesting how it came back full circle, that they knew exactly where it was. And they could tell me about my grandmother because she died the year before I was conceived. So because she had the bakery, and my grandfather was a magistrate in the area, and they lived in a sort of an upper coming black community, not a black community that had more light skinned blacks, and it was that kind of community. Well, it's a really long story that my birth mother's mother was living with a tyrant, and my birth mother was a sweet little girl that she was but spoiled rotten by her parents, and she was very alive, and she had the first car, and she was a little rich girl, but her mother wanted to leave the father, so she wanted to make sure her daughter was married off in the best way. And so they set their eyes on my father and his brother, who are West Point cadets. So her mother, my grandmother, my mother's mother, says to my maternal grandmother says to my paternal grandfather that my mother was 18 years old and she would love to see her with my grandfather when my father graduates from West Point for them to get together. So my father, according to him, he was not really that excited about the union, but his mom had a heart attack and died instantly in 1951. And now he's towards the end of 51. Her sisters come from Italy with their husbands, to help, the mourning, but they stay a while and to help my grandfather and to help my father, and uncle kind of deal with the death of their mother. So when they go back to Italy, uh, my grandfather, I have a letter, all this is in writing. A letter says that to my grandfather writes my aunts and uncles and says that uh, a girl has just claimed that she's pregnant by Roscoe, by our, and so they called him RJ. Was that he got some girl pregnant, and he says that he's not in love and he cannot marry the girl because he would have to give up his commission at West Point. And so the father says, if your son does not marry my daughter, then the baby's going up for adoption. So they send my mother away to have the baby it's still in Kansas, to have the baby, and the baby was put up for adoption. Because my grandfather was a magistrate and nobody was going to fight over, somebody taking a little black baby, he decides to adopt me. And he writes a letter to his sister-in-laws and his brother-in-laws. The baby was born, and I have the baby. I adopted the baby. My aunts and uncles write back, it's a girl. You cannot raise a girl baby by yourself. Bring her to us. And they could not have children because when they were in Dachau, they were participating in the sterilization program, that they were sterilized by the program that Mingala has set up, Dr. Mingala set up. So they were sterilized, so they couldn't have children. So my uncle said, well, there's a big argument of who's going to be the primary parents for this baby. So my grandfather says, will you guys get it taken care of? And, then I'll bring her. So at 5 months old, I'm on a boat to Italy to my parents, and that they made an agreement that I could change houses every Wednesday morning. But eventually that was probably in my first months of infancy before I started walking, because the entire village said when I started to walk that I was out the door naked, and there was no phones in the homes, so they would all have to sort of do house by house to say, have you seen Tony? Have you seen Tony? Have you seen Tony? Oh, she's here. I got her and I dressed her and she's down for a nap. So I had a bedroom in everybody's house because everybody would catch me, because I would just run out the door and I just had the freedom of the whole village. My father always had contact with me. He would come and have contact with me. But at 12, when I was 12 years of age, he felt that I was a bit spoiled and that I was a bit, I needed to see the world. I needed to know
Right.
kind of, the one thing that happened, My father was in the military, so he's got a very good friend named Colonel Price. And Colonel Price's sister is this great opera singer, Leontine Price. And she's singing at the La Scala in Milan. Everybody, we're trying to, and my father, she's agreed to my father that he wanted me to have some kind of connection to a woman that was my current, would she be my godmother? And she was like, she would be delighted. So she says, I'll be playing at the La Scala in Milan. Brilliant. Well, by the time we get to the La Scala, it was late and we get there. But when we arrive, it's at the end of her performance. But my goodness.
She's taking her bows.
She was taking her bows. It was the first time I ever saw a black woman like me. And they're throwing flowers and roses. And I'm like, oh my God, it's true. We're gods. We're roses. Oh my God, I'm going to have to learn to curtsy like that and bow. Everybody's going to be throwing flowers at me for the rest of my life. Oh my God, this is what it's going to be like for me when I grow up. Oh my goodness. Because I hadn't heard a single word. I just saw all the flowers being thrown. So my father comes and says, it's now time for you let's go to the States. My aunts were very upset. My uncle's very upset. But they say, okay, you may be right. She needs to spend some time there. So as we come to the States and I'm in the car and we're in Texas now, my father's in Texas, and we're driving around the Texas, and I'm like, oh, we're in the land of roses. There's another rose. There's another rose. It was so many roses. I was so excited that it was just my father was a rose now, and then all these other people in that car was a rose. There was another car. Of course, I saw a lot of whites, but I saw these black people and there were roses. And my mother's mother had always maintained some kind of contact with my father and grandfather in some way. And she came to meet with me there and without my father's permission, told me about my birth mother and that I had sisters and brothers. And I was so excited. And they lived in Texas at that time, in a different part of Texas, in Dallas, Texas. So that's where I couldn't wait I didn't want to care about meeting my mother. I didn't miss having a mother. I had lots of mothers.
Right.
I had so many, but I sure was like, I didn't have anybody to play with, the sisters and brothers and things. So they arranged and I got to meet my sisters and brothers, but they lived in real poverty. And my mother was sort of kind of struggled with her life, with just not the right men in her life. She had always the wrong men that came into her life. After she married a military man after my father refused her. She married somebody else after having me, but she never found that right person for her, and she ended up with 5 children and still not being able to find somebody that would take responsibility. She was struggling all the time for her 5 children. And my father was getting ready to marry this woman that was light skinned. She looked like she was Latin American, and so she was totally against, and she had children. She had children too. And her children looked like her and my father, who was half white, half black. So they looked more alike, the family.
Right.
And so they were getting ready to have a union. So she did everything to push me off, to get my father to get rid of me and let me go. But I didn't help matters because I didn't like her. I didn't have much against my mother. I just kind of felt sorry for my birth mother.
Right.
But I loved my sisters and brothers. And I felt like I could be more of a help to them. I thought that all the learning I had by running, being a butcher, being a milk, being all of the things I wanted to be in the village, the postal carrier, everything, that all of those I could harness within me to figure out a way of helping at 12 years old take care of my brothers and sisters.
They were also in Texas?
They were also in Texas.
Okay. And at that time you also started going to school.
My father was high up in the military, and so what is the fort in Texas that he was?
Like Colleen at Fort Hood.
He was the commander.
Yes,
Okay.
no, that fort, yeah. Well, Patton was the commander. He was under Patton at that point.
But eventually,
Patton Jr.
eventually, her
Patton
father
Jr.
became a general.
Oh, okay. Wow.
But so my mother, I ended up going to school, but now I'm not good at English. I'm not good at English, and even sometimes now when I'm thinking now I can speak in a wonderful American. I can speak English really well, but if I'm nervous, I think in Italian, and but I can't translate it fast enough into English to. And I have a what do you call it, a tick, because I was beaten by my mother. She felt that I was trying to be better than anyone if I didn't try and speak English. So I was in trouble anytime
This is your birth mother.
had my birth mother.
Got it. But at
Very,
the same time, when you were going to school, you are also taking care of your brothers and sisters.
yes, more so
Right.
that. But then I end up missing a lot of school because I didn't know one thing about it. I mean,
Right.
I never forget, the kids were laughing at me, and I never forget this as long as I live, that on the teacher asked, what are the 5 types of sentences? I thought she said senses. And so I wanted, I'm always like, still today, I'm always raising my hand and wanting to get involved. I said, smell, hearing, speaking, thinking, and all the kids started laughing. She says, no, sentences. Don't you know what a sentence is? Yeah, smell.
Right.
I then recognized, she recognized then that I could not understand English yet.
Right.
And that I was trying very hard. And she was surprised that I came. As long as we stayed in math problems, I was doing well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Came into,
Math is an universal language.
yes, but when it came to me writing or uh, uh, composing a story or a sentence, the idea I could try and get down, but then the idea would go into Italian. And so it was like she then knew that I never forget, this teacher was from Egypt, Texas. I had no idea that it was Egypt, Texas. But she felt that
That's
I was
true.
having
Now that I think of, yeah. Egypt, Texas.
yes. And I was like, so I recognized I wasn't doing well, but also my mother had a boyfriend. And he brought his children to live with us. And so his children were to try to overpower my sisters and brothers, so that if they were on the bed, whenever they slept, they would pull them off of the bunk beds and throw them down and make them sleep on the floor, and they would take over the beds. So I felt like I had to be their champion and say, you don't do that. They were sleeping there first, and then I would pull his child down. And when he did that, was the first time I got this cut over my eye right now. I have a cut here. He beat me with a belt buckle and beat me. And so when I went to school, I was all bruised. By this time, I'm supposed to go back home to my father. to, because I'm only there for for a few months to get that experience. But my stepmother's still angling that they're on their way to Japan, and so she's trying to figure out how can she keep me where with my mother, and she and I don't. It was just crazy. But my mother has to keep me hidden from my father, because if my father sees my face, he's going to know that I'm being terribly abused. So in the meantime, it's all worked out that, okay, I will join them in Japan later on, and that I can stay with my mother. But my father now has to send money for my caring, my support. So that was very good for my mother, because my father sent lots of money for my care. But during that time, uh, it was going to her boyfriends.
Right, right,
And then uh, when I found out that my father was going to let me stay, and after I got healed, I wasn't doing well in school. So I ended up getting a job at a restaurant as a bus girl. And I was now 13 years old.
Passing for 16.
And my mother told them I was 16 so I could work.
right, right.
So she had this guy that had just gotten out of prison, and he couldn't find a job, and they like to go out, but the waiters gave tips to the bus people, for the bus girls and bus boys. They gave you some of their tip. So when I would come home at night, most of my tip would go to the man, and for them to go out, or for them to go get something to eat. I ate at the restaurant. They made sure that I could eat some of the leftovers at the restaurant. But it was getting time for my father to want to see me on the journey to Japan. That, to say goodbye, because I'm all he has. Now he has stepchildren, but now I'm all that he has. And he comes, and I'm not there, because my mother now has absconded to Kansas City. And my grandmother tells my father, well, they're on their way here, and I will look after her. So he says, well, I will send the money to you, and you will take, that I hope that you will look out after her. But my grandmother my mother's mother was a very doting mother upon her only child, my mother, very doting. So I ended up being totally at the mercy of my mother's uh, lovers and boyfriends, and beaten, raped. I can remember the time that I was raped, really badly beaten and raped. I was thrown out of the house, and I walked the streets for a month and a half. I was on the streets. And I remember when I saw that, when I first, I was bleeding, I guess the hymen was broken, and I was bleeding down my legs and everything. And I saw a sign at the distance. There was a big red uh, horse with wings. It was the Pegasus.
Right.
And it was a standard filling station when I got up there. The guy gave me a cloth and soap, and told me I could go to the bathroom and wash off. And he gave me things to drink, but I could not, he said he could not let me stay in the place, and but I could come and wash up there. And at this time, I had to take a test, because I always had the guys at the restaurant and other people, because I was always hungering for knowledge. So I always want to take it to read and try to understand English and try to do what I could. That they told me I should take a test for high school to get into this high school. And I had not been to school since I was in the fourth or fifth grade. But I took a test and I qualified, and they said that you should be a sophomore. You qualify. The test put me into the 10th year of high school. And I was not, I was far advanced for
How old were you at that time?
At that time, I was like 14, 13, 14, 13, 14. So I was like, without having any schooling, but also that I had advanced, even if I went to school, I would have been, I would have been a year ahead of I would still have been a year or two ahead of the natural academics. So, but when I went to school, I had the same clothing on every day, and the children made fun of me. And so I had to withdraw from the school. Plus, when they would say, well, I had my pride. I wouldn't let them know that I had not eaten or whatever. And at night, I always relied on the angels, my instincts, because I skipped over a lot of stuff. I'm making things short, really short. But there was a time when it was time for me as a child to go to bed, and my aunt said, no more lights on at night. You can now go to sleep. You're a big girl. You can sleep without lights. My uncles would come and say, all right, now you are a big girl, but we have a surprise for you. But Gabrielle, all of the angels, they're here. They would say, Angel Gabriel, niente viene famiglia, to stop smoking. And I would say, it's okay, you can smoke.
Put out that cigarette.
Yeah. Give me the cigarette. No, it's okay, you can smoke. It's smoking angel. But everybody, he said, they will watch over you all night. And they will, in fact, they will watch over you all the time. So they promise them, you can go to sleep, you can turn out the lights. And when I go to sleep, I would say, I think I smell your smoke, Gabriel. I think I can smell you. And I always felt Angel Michael, while he was standing there stern with his sword, ready to vanquish anything that was going to attack me. So I always felt that. And when I was first beaten, I was thrown into a basement, and was like lots of rats, and I'd never been in a dark basement. And I called on the angels.
How long do you think you were down there?
About 24 hours, maybe. Maybe a day, maybe 2 nights.
And how old were you at that?
That was when I was with my mom. That was when I first got after that beating.
So you may be 12 or 13.
Yeah, I was about 12, 13. I was about almost 13. But that's when I got that beating, that scar. As I had regrets. So I called on the angels there. Now, fast forward back, I had to regress with it. But coming now to fast forwarding when I had walking the streets. So I didn't want to go. And then I went through, then I tried to pretend everything was okay at school. But it wasn't, because the girls were so cruel. My hair wasn't combed correctly. You know, and this was not a white school. This was a school where blacks were. And there was a barber shop across the street. And I never forget, the guy was named Augie. And he said, he saw me sitting on the thing of the school, and I was crying. And he said, I said, well, he says, why are you crying? I said that my hair looks terrible, and they don't like my clothing, and this is all I have. And so he said, come, and he took me to the back of his barbershop, and I found that that's where they call boosters, people that go and steal things. And he gave me a dress and new clothes to put on, and he fixed my hair up. So I still try to go back to the school a couple, going to school at that time, but they were still not nice to me because I still had to sleep. The angels told me because at night I had to walk the streets. I walked the streets, and how I got food is that, and I always tell David sometimes that this is the, if you talk about some of the great times of my life, this was the best, the most beautiful time I can remember in my life. Is that I was so hungry and I was walking the streets, and all of a sudden, I found a nickel. And there was a fast food place called Smack's Drive-In. And for one nickel, you could get a big bag of French fries. And there was a park right behind this fast food place. It was a park called Central Park, and it had no, Central Park. It was like down the street in Indiana area, and uh, they had a water fountain. So I got the French fries, and I went and sat down by the water fountain and under a tree and ate those French fries. And it was such a wonderful day. And I said, "This is the happiest day of my life." This is because it was so wonderful just to be able to, that bag of French fries. And I'm like,
Absolutely.
how am I going to eat all of this? It's like a feast. And then
That
there
is
was water.
completely like definitely a blessing.
Yes, I was just overjoyed by it.
Yes, absolutely.
And the angels, I wish you could eat real food because you just don't know how good this tastes. I was always talking to the angels. So and at night, and so then at night the angels would say, all right, I would walk the streets and I would be in a neighborhood, and the angels would say a car would be following me, and the angels say, run up on run up to the porch, crouch down. They'll think that you're at home, and then take a nap, and we'll wake you up in time before the occupants of the house come out. So I was able to sleep and go up on the porch, sleep before the occupants of the house came out. And every day I would walk, and I always said that I tell people it's nothing wrong with looking down. I would find a nickel. One day I found a quarter, and I had a hamburger, French fries. I mean, it was wonderful. And that day that I found the quarter and I had the hamburger and French fries, I had to walk. I walked a long time that night because it was so much going on. I think it was like a Friday night weekend. And I was very tired, and I ended up going on a porch. And I fell asleep. And the angels did not wake me up, but a loud voice woke me up. A woman coming home from partying. And she's like, what are you doing on my porch? Oh, she was absolutely mean, and I'm scared to death. And the angels are like, no, 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 don't be. And she's like, what is it? And I'm trying to speak in English, speak in Italian, trying to get the story, why are you on my porch? What are you doing? You trying to break into my house? No, 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 no. And she had her boyfriend with her, and she's like, I think we should call the police. And he's like, no, I think she's just scared. And she's like, well, why are you scared? What did you do? Why are you on my porch? Why are you? I'm just sleeping. I'm sorry, I'll go. She says, no, you're not going anywhere. And she pushed me in her house. The angel said, don't worry. We will not let her hurt you. Well, you let the guy beat me up. You let this guy rape me. And I'm beginning to think that Angel Michael's not on his job, his JOB. So I, and she's told her, then she said, oh, she got me calmed down. She calmed down, but she was drinking too. I never forgot that. And then years later, I still have great fondness for her, Marie. So she was drinking, and she says, well, um, uh, get back there and get in that bed. And I'm like, well, I've been raped. What more could help? What more could happen to me now? And she says, get back there and go to that bed and go to sleep. And the next day, it was the Friday. I slept there was like it was going on to Saturday morning. So that Friday must have been, I was walking the streets, must have been Good Friday. Because Saturday I slept that whole day, because when I woke up the next day, when I woke up, it was Easter Sunday morning.
Right.
And she had this clothing laid out for me, the most beautiful lime dress, I'll never forget it, with a top, a gold lame top that you tied with a Nehru collar. And she had a wig to fix my hair, it was blonde, fix my hair. And she says, we're going to my family's home in Leavenworth for a party, for this is Easter. And I'm like, okay. And she says, and she made a bath for me. She says, now take a bath. You do need help. No, I don't need help with the bath. Yeah. So she was like, and she was sobered up and she was really kind. But what was so wonderful was when we got to this place where her family was in Leavenworth, Kansas. They were in a place called the Legion, the American Legion. And her family had a table at the American Legion. The American Legion looked exactly like my uncle's trattoria on the inside.
So
And her
American Legion is
It's
what is it?
veteran.
It's
like
a
a
restaurant.
hall, or it's a hall.
Okay.
Or,
Okay.
yeah, Army Veteran Hall. But it's a hall. The American Legion is a hall for American Legion Army veterans to have parties.
They can have dinners there.
And all.
Okay. Got it.
And so this table was filled with, like on holidays at the Trattoria, of all the families coming together. And
Right. Right.
I'm like, whoa. And so she introduces me, and they are the most loving family in the world. They are so wonderful. And so and the eldest brother, the elder brother says to her, finds out what could you get. God gets the story that she got out of me. And he said that you're not taking her back to Kansas City. She's going to stay here with us. And I found out later on that this Marie, she was a prostitute. So she was going to take me back and groom me to be a part of her story. But her cousin, who was the big boss down in Leavenworth of all he was like, no, no, no. And so he said, you're going to stay at my house. I'm going to take care of you until we can find out where you belong. And I said, we're going to find out, because I didn't know how to call long distance to Italy, or to find my father,
Right.
didn't know how to do any of that. So he gave me a key when he got to his house. He gave me a key to this bedroom. He says that you lock the door, and no one, because he says, you don't have to. No one is going to hurt you anyway. But I think with all that you've been through, you should lock this door.
Right.
And I did. And so for a year, he came to me and he says, I found your aunts in Italy, and they want you to come home. And I'm like, I don't want to go, because then I won't be able to come back. He says, yes, you would need your father's permission. And now I'm 15 years old now. So he said, the only thing and I was crying, no, 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 no. My father, I don't like his wife. I don't want to go. Now I've had all this worldly experience, I know.
Right. Of course.
So he says, but I want you to go and get your education, and that so that you have an education that you can go where you're more familiar.
Right.
And I'm like, but I'll never see you again. And because he was so wonderful, he's
Exactly.
first crush, my first love. And he said, the only answer that I have, he said, the laws of Kansas says that I can marry you at 15. You can marry. He said, but and that way I can say you can go back and forth. So we get married. And he's able to send me back to Italy. But in the summertime, I get to come back.
Oh,
So
nice.
and nobody could say a word. And
Right.
the next summer I came back, I was like 16 going on 17. I I insisted on consummating our marriage. And that's when I came up with my first daughter. I insisted upon it. And he was like, oh no, this is not possible. But he loved me and I loved him very much. But he still insisted that this is not going to stop you from going to school. Eventually, I finished school. My husband said that he wanted me to go off and do the work that I had, and that my daughters could come and be with me in the summertime. If I were in Africa, they could come, or wherever I was, if they could come in the summer. And because I wanted to still pursue my work and higher education. And it's a long story of me falling in love and getting married again. But he was more so, he loved me as his wife and he loved me as the mother of his children, but he also he wanted more for me. And he was 25 years my senior, and he just wanted more for me. So when I would fall in love, I would say, I'm in love with this man. And he would say, let's see what he's like. He was more like my father, too. But that was and I think that period of time, now, mind you, when I was a youngster, I was very sickly in ways. I had bronchitis, which led to what I have now, and also the bronchiectasis. So we know that my pulmonary physician says that we're trying to keep that beggar cancer out of your lungs. It's been in your, it's been my cervix. I've had it, I've had leukemia, and I fought it off. So it's trying to find its way in on every way that possible. But they've been able to block it off, and we've been able to get rid of it. And the last time I had a stem cell transplant 10 years ago, and I'm doing well from the leukemia. And the thing was but all of that was everything all those journeys that I had, from understanding what I was telling you about my grandfather and his journey to Germany, and the prejudice, even though he was even by white, but all of that, I sort of informs my story of how I could handle diseases.
Thank you for staying with us. In the next part, we'll get to know Dr. Hollander's personal struggle with cancer and her triumph over it. Please like and share these podcasts and subscribe to Sapien. Until next time.